All right, we're moving on to the Roman Republic and to the period of the first emperors of Rome. So the Roman Republic was a period where there was rule by many. This is a period after the expulsion of the Etruscan kings. So the Etruscan kings were expelled in 509 BCE. And so we begin this period of the Roman Republic with a rule by many. You have the Senate, and you also have two consuls. So two rulers as a way of preventing a single individual from becoming too powerful. However, they did have a system of electing a dictator during times of crisis. This is a way that individuals could make quick decisions when this was absolutely necessary. But of course, an individual who took advantage of this and who named himself dictator in perpetuity is, of course, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, an extremely popular military general who had a lot of troops behind him, but names himself dictator in perpetuity and then is assassinated in 44 BCE. And so clearly this was not well received by the Senate. But this marks an important change because just 15 years after or so, you'll have your first emperor, Augustus, coming into power, who consolidates rule for himself. So he does it quite carefully. He takes on new roles very slowly, but he does become known as the first emperor. So the first century, or kind of as you move into the CE, the Common Era, or the AD period, you start to see this shift in Rome. There had been a lot of civil wars, there had been a lot of political upheaval, and then you start to see this shift towards consolidating power around a single emperor. So that's an important change politically and socially, but also in terms of art. Rome has a lot of influence from Greece, so it's important to realize that because they were colonizing or because they were taking over areas that the Greeks had previously colonized, they were being exposed to a lot of Greek artwork. For example, they took over Sicily, or they took over Syracuse in Sicily in 211 BCE. They were in Corinth in 147, and these are important moments when they are seeing Greek art, when they're able to bring it back with them, when they're being inspired by it. And of course, we need to remember that so many of the Greek artworks that we examine today are Roman copies because the Romans appreciated that Greek aesthetic. So if we move on, one of the main contributions of the Romans artistically is portraiture. Portraiture was very, very important to the Romans. You would display portraits of your ancestors in the atrium of your house. You would want to emphasize your ancestry through portraiture. And so we see an emphasis on individuality. But we also see trends in portraiture. So during the Republican period, the trend is what we call this veristic style portrait. Verism is this kind of intense or extreme realism. So I have verism written here. And so what we see here is the same portrait, one photograph in black and white, one in color, of an older man. And we presume that he didn't actually have this many wrinkles, but the trend at the time was to give people this many wrinkles, was to emphasize people's age, was to say, this person has made hard decisions, this person's experienced, this person has a lot of wisdom. So this was the style during the Republican period, because this was the type of gentleman that one might see in the Senate, or someone who would be elected to an important office or would hold an important role in the Roman Empire. So that was the style during the Republican period. And we have lots of examples that are in this veristic style. But when we have our first emperor coming into power, and that is, of course, Augustus, whose name previously was Octavian, and Octavian kind of battles it out with a few individuals, including Mark Antony, who had teamed up with Cleopatra in Egypt, and he was able to defeat them in 31 BCE, and he becomes the first citizen, eventually turning Rome from a republic more into a system where there's a single emperor. There still is the Senate, but there's a fundamental shift when Octavian, who was renamed Augustus, comes to power. So hopefully we can see that the portrait style has changed dramatically as we move to the period of Augustus. So his face is smooth. We do see some individualized features, like his ears stick out slightly. We see his comma-shaped locks, which are we see them throughout his portraits, but he never ages in his portraits. So we see him bringing in a new artistic style to emphasize a period of renewal. Rome had just been through a very difficult time politically, socially. People were said to have stopped having children. People were said to have been, very frightened during this time of intense warfare. People were hesitant to grow crops. So Rome had been through a lot, and so it seems like Augustus brings in a new form of art to try to emphasize renewal, to try to emphasize a new golden age, to emphasize peace. So all of this is incorporated in his portraits. Here we see this emphasis on peace on his breastplate, and we'll take a look at that in just a second. So if we zoom in, we can see that there's a little Cupid figure down by his foot, emphasizing his divine connection. So Octavian or Augustus claimed to be descended from Venus. So Venus is the Roman form, Aphrodite is the Greek form. So just like his relative Julius Caesar, he claimed this connection, and he subtly, and maybe not so subtly, incorporates it into his sculpture with this little figure here. He also has bare feet, which can be seen as kind of a divine connection, even though his dress illustrates kind of military connections. He's also connecting himself to ancient Greek art because of his stance, right? He's got that contrapposto stance. He looks like the spear bearer or the Doryphorus. But he's also connecting himself to more Roman traditions with that oration gesture where he's extending his arm. And oration or speaking, rhetoric was so important in ancient Rome. If we zoom in on his breastplate, we can see a key scene where he's emphasizing his role of peace, or he's emphasizing his abilities at bringing about peace for Rome. So what we see here is an instance of diplomacy. So the Parthians had actually taken the military standards of the Romans long ago, taken in 53 BCE, long before Augustus comes to power, and the Romans really wanted them to get these back through military means, through a more violent strategy. However, Augustus decides they're going to get them through diplomacy. So what we see here is a Roman general, some people have suggested Tiberius, who will be the next emperor after Augustus, going and getting these standards back. And these standards were so important to the Roman military. So Augustus is showing, look, I'm a peaceful person, and he's emphasizing that in the artwork. Another thing that we see that emphasizes more of these divine connections, as we saw with the little Cupid figure, is this idea that they're going to begin deifying a lot of the emperors after this period. So the first person they deify is Julius Caesar. So he wasn't even an emperor, he just named himself dictator. But what we see here is a coin struck under Augustus, a silver coin from Spain. So remember, Spain's part of the empire. But we can see here a coin from Spain where you have Augustus at the front, looking very youthful as always with his little comma-shaped locks. We see Caesar Augustus here. And then on the opposite side, we can see divine Julius. And it was believed that because there was this great comet in 44 BCE, it was believed to be a sign of Julius Caesar's deification or his apotheosis. Both are terms that indicate becoming a god. So he kind of starts things off, and then eventually Augustus will be deified, and we'll see this with a lot of the different emperors. Not all emperors will be deified, but all the ones that are received well by later generations tend to be deified. A lot of the ones that were celebrated later on become gods after they die, or are believed to become gods. Another piece of propaganda in Augustus's plan for emphasizing peace is one of his most famous works, the Pacis Augustae, or the Altar of Augustan Peace, which today is still in Rome. It's an altar. You can see the area for like the main altar right in the center, and it's an interesting piece because you have the idea of kind of a flourishing empire. You have all this plant life that decorates it. You also have a lot of Greek influence, so again referring back to the golden age of Greece, but you also have a lot of deeply Roman myths that are included. So for example, we have Romulus and Remus, stories of the founding of Rome. Aeneas is another story associated with the founding of Rome. Mother Earth, or Tellus, is this figure of plenty with children, so this idea of Rome being prosperous again, and then you have a personification of Rome over here. And all of these are relatively fragmentary, so these are the best guesses of art historians. Over here, then you see a procession of the people who they wanted to be there or hoped they would be there at the consecration of the altar. And we see Augustus, we see members of their family, and we even see children, which is very unusual in ancient art. It was part of a large layout that included an obelisk, a kind of sundial, and it was along a road going into Rome. So this was in a pretty uninhabited area of Rome where actually the military would do exercises. And it was also close to where Augustus would eventually be interred with his family. So this was a special area of the city that eventually becomes dominated by by Augustus and by his artworks, or his political artworks. If we zoom in on those processions on the side, you can see those children, again, quite unusual, and you can see people chatting and enjoying themselves in what we think is probably a procession on the occasion of the consecration. Okay, and for the last part of this discussion, we'll be looking at 4 different painting styles that developed during the ancient Roman period that have been established in the area of Pompeii, which is just south of Rome, near the city of Naples. So of course, as most people know, Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE or AD, and this covered not only Pompeii, but a number of other cities and houses. So we'll have a look at some of the daily life there, as well as the painting styles. So here we can just see a street in Pompeii. You can see kind of the deep areas along the side here where water could flow along, how you would cross the streets, how there would be shops along these main roads. Here you can see the atrium of a house. This is quite typical for a very upper class Roman house where you would walk in, have an atrium, the more public areas towards the front, more private areas towards the back. You tended to have office space in the front and shops, and then dining rooms and bedrooms towards the back. And some homes had not only the atrium but an interior garden, so we can see that back there. And here's just a view from up above of a different house, the house of the tragic poet. The previous house was the house of the Vettii. And again, you can see kind of these smaller rooms, the dining room, the tablinum where you could do work, and then shops in the front. So this is the first style painting. The first style is just imitation stone, and this is one from the fauces or jaws of a house in Herculaneum. So this is another city that was covered up by the volcanic eruption. So the first style is just imitation stone. The second style tends to be views of architectural settings or just large kind of monumental figures that are painted. One of the most famous second style paintings are these Dionysiac mystery frieze, or basically they're sometimes just called the frescoes of the Villa of the Mysteries. So we believe these are some types of rituals associated with a cult of Dionysus or Bacchus, and we believe it's probably associated with some kind of marriage ritual or introduction to marriage rites. So you have a woman kind of getting ready on the side, and then you start to see individuals from the kind of retinue of Bacchus or Dionysus. He is here. You can see Dionysus here, looking drunk, kind of reclining on the lap of his wife. And then you see a figure about to uncover something underneath a sheet. Some people have suggested this could be a phallus. So again, kind of introducing a figure to marriage ritual. Some people suggest it could be something else. Then you have a winged figure that's whipping a woman over here. So this could be part of those rites. So there we kind of zoom in. You can see that woman, she's about to perhaps take this sheet or this cloth off. You can see this woman holding her whip, and she's whipping this crouched figure, this kind of half-nude crouched figure over here. The third style is very, very delicate architecture, very thin, attenuated columns with sometimes small sacro-idyllic landscapes or sacred landscapes, but very, very delicate, and sometimes it even includes Egyptian imagery, because at this point it's post the Battle of Actium, and we start to see more Egyptian imagery coming in. And finally, the fourth style is, as some people say, a collage or an amalgam of the different styles that we've previously seen. This is a dining room from the house of the Vettii. You can see the imitation stone here. You can see an area here that looks kind of third style, more of a flat wall or flat area of color with delicate decoration, and then more of an open wall with bigger decoration that's more second style. So you tend to see more of an open wall and then a closed, open, closed. And what we see here are stories that were probably meant to entertain the viewer, stories that are associated with mythology. And so the way this would work originally is you would have couches on 3 of the walls, 1, 2, 3. And that's why we call it a triclinium. So tri, 3, cline, couch. So 3 couches along these walls. And the idea is you would have these images on the wall. Hopefully they would spark conversation and get you interested in the household decoration. And this was a house that was being decorated and remodeled right up until the time of the eruption of Vesuvius. So we call it the fourth or the latest style because this was kind of the last type of painting that was being produced before that eruption.